In 2022, something inexplicable occurred on Earth. From nowhere, the first zone of alienation appeared. A thick white fog enveloped hundreds of miles, absorbing entire cities. Millions of people disappeared in this fog, and only a few managed to get out. Now this territory is known as a lifeless zone, a place where no one is returning. The alienation zone hung over the world. A thick, cold veil hid everything living, enveloping the Earth with a sense of endless loneliness and a hidden threat. The young girl watched her friend with excitement, who unsuccessfully tried to cope with the situation. She was interested in how much time had already passed. The guy, taking a breath, noted that he had passed for almost an hour, but his legs began to take. Xuan understood his fatigue, but insisted that it was necessary to tolerate a little more left, and the guy should be a good brother. The young man hardly admitted that his lower back could no longer withstand. The girl again tried to cheer him up, convincing that a friend should be strong. She had long said that he should pay attention to training the lower part of the body. Escher gathered all the remaining forces and said that this is the last time he agrees to this. Everything had to be considered properly. Gently looking out of the shelter, Xuan looked carefully. The next moment, the girl raised binoculars to her eyes, but, barely noticing what was happening in the distance, involuntarily cried out. The battle was raging on the horizon. The soldiers opposed a huge monster which significantly exceeded them in size. Mighty horns towered on his head. Suddenly there was a piercing cry of the savage, accompanied by a powerful magical radiance. The fighters did not give up, clutching a weapon in their hands and striking one after another. Clear, fast, merciless. One brave warrior squeezing his weapon fearlessly in his hands went on an attack. However, the monsters became more and more. Every minute their number grew. Dazzling flashes flashed around. Shots rattled. The battle flared up. Fighters and other creatures attacked a werewolf who published a heart-rending roar, forcing the earth to shudder. The girl did not take his eyes off what was happening, but her friend recalled that they were not here for the spectacle, but for the sake of prey. Meanwhile, one of the fighters, swinging the weapon, created a circle of radiance around him, scattered and, jumping, inflicted a powerful werewolf. The monster roared in pain, but the young man did not stop and continued attacks on the enemy. Making a new jump, the guy destroyed the stone fragments around. His body glowed with a bright light, and he, taking his breath, watched a defeated victim. The partner came closer and, looking into the face of the enemy, expressed doubt whether the monster was really dead. The warrior did not answer immediately, thoughtfully suggesting that it was probably so. The next moment found him leaning over the werewolf's body. The rest slowly approached the motionless creature. Xuan wondered how great it would be to possess psychic abilities, but since her friend was silent, the girl resolutely jerked him, trying to understand if he agreed with her reasoning. The answer followed unexpectedly. He admitted that he could no longer. Suddenly, the young man lost his balance and with a dull sound fell to the ground, scratching his head. He noted that the blow was painful. The girl drew attention to the fact that the soldiers were able to defeat a huge monster, which means that today they will definitely have meat. 2 hours later, they reached the old palace, which was 17 kilometers east of the exclusion zone. Food was already brewing in the pot, spreading a pleasant aroma. He stirred it with a spoon, and other heroes impatiently stood nearby, noting how tasty the dish smells of. Soon the food was laid out on plates and transferred to everyone for treats. The guy handed the first dish to his grandfather. A tempting and fragrant steam rose above the pot. The old man coughed, and the young man advised him to be more careful. But his grandfather replied that he was still strong enough to take care of himself. He thoughtfully sent the bone in his mouth, and his friend watched this with displeasure. In irritation, she noticed that there would be enough meat for a few days, so do not swallow the bones. And with these words, Xuan threw a piece of fillet into his plate. The young man wanted to leave the bone in reserve, but the girl categorically stated that this could not be done. Dissatisfied, he began to chew the meat, but the next moment he felt something strange. Suddenly his vision clouded, and temporary blindness reigned before his eyes. 7 years ago, the invisible wall imprisoned the agem of the alienation of the white fog. This invisible blind zone extended around the entire perimeter, limiting the space with 17 kilometers. Only a narrow corridor remained between the forbidden territory and the safe zone, the only thing that gave a chance to survival. He stood among the ruins, squeezing a lamp in his hands, exuding bright light. For 7 years, in conclusion, they forced him to experience all possible methods of escape. The guy touched the invisible obstacle, hoping to find a weak place, but again and again suffered failure. There was a deafening explosion behind. The young man instantly clamped his ears with his hands to drown out the roar. But neither explosives nor other tricks helped. Everything turned out to be futile. Years of searches led him to desperate attempts to break out. He dug the tunnel, hoping to break through the ground, erected stairs, trying to leave imprisonment through the air. The lamp suddenly slipped out of the hands of Isher, hitting the floor with a loud ringing. Attacks of temporary blindness became more and more often, turning his life into the existence of a prisoner. He looked around, listening to the sounds outside the wall. In complete silence, the guy watched his girlfriend talking with the old man. But it was impossible to endure further. Everything was raging inside, and his eyes flashed with determination. The night slowly sank into the world, enveloping it with thick darkness. At that time, his friend was already calmly sleeping on her bed, not suspecting that she no longer intended to wait. The girl, having heard the creak of the door, slightly opened her eyes, gradually regaining consciousness. She looked right in front of her. The guy bent over her, watching her awakening. They looked into each other's eyes. Realizing that Xuan was no longer sleeping, the young man announced the need to immediately leave and take his grandfather from here. The girl once again repeated that she would find a way to destroy the invisible wall and take him with her. Xuan could not do otherwise, because they were connected by much when the girl made a promise. Turning away to the wall, she said that she would do this at all costs. 7 years ago, the white fog spread at an incredible speed, absorbing most of the city. In a noisy crowd, Xuan collapsed to the ground, and indifferent passers-by hurried about their business, not paying attention to it. As a little girl, she screamed with horror, but no one stopped, and then her named brother held out his hand, urging her to grab her. With tears in her eyes, but with a timid hope, Xuan looked at her savior. He assured that they would certainly get out of this together, and again held out his palm. At that moment, the girl swore that she would remain with him until the invisible wall was destroyed. It was then that this promise was given. Their conversation suddenly interrupted the cough of the grandfather of Mu from the next room. He noted that he could wait, but the time is inexorably. The old man is no longer able to stay in anticipation for too long. Only by finding a human colony, they will be able to cure him, and both understood this very well. The young man tried to convince her sister that she should not stay here because of him. This invisible wall holds only him, and the girl could be free. But Xuan, with desperate in her voice, objected. She will not leave him, because he always protected her from adversity. The guy firmly stated that he could survive alone, and she should stop wasting time and start living his life. Perhaps if Xuan had become a psychic, she could return after him and protect. For a moment, the girl thought for a moment. They stood opposite each other in a gloomy room, immersed in silence. He reminded her of this promise, and intended to prepare everything necessary so that they were ready to leave by dawn. But at the last moment, the girl grabbed him by the clothes, begging him not to leave and stay next a little more. Despite the resistance, Xuan insisted that a friend return to his room. Squeezed cries were heard from there soon. The next morning, the young man watched after the retreating black car, waving his hand in parting. His face expressed deep sadness. It was difficult to part with friends, but there was no other way out. Grandfather Mu was surprised to notice that Xuan took too many boxes with her, and asked if she was preparing for large purchases. Turning slightly, the girl calmly replied that this was not the point. Too many important things were stored in the boxes. The old man squinted with suspicion, feeling that she was hiding something. The next second, Mu screamed in horror, demanding to stop the car, assuring that they could not leave him alone. But Xuan only pressed the gas more strongly, and the car rushed forward with even greater speed. Meanwhile, the young man stood, looking right in front of him. Now he was left alone. The wind fluttered his naughty hair, and his eyes involuntarily filled with bitter tears. The alienation zone, a deadly place that arose more than 200 years ago and continuing to grow. The guy looked around, feeling how longing over his soul, but there was no way to destroy this anomaly, and its origin remained a mystery. Studies have shown that in white fog, people are related to special rules. These laws are almost impossible to find out, since a significant part of them is recorded in the ancient Book of Rules created more than 200 years ago at the cost of huge casualties. Anyone who violates them is doomed to instant punishment and inevitable death. Nevertheless, everyone who dares to step into the alienation zone must leave hope. There is no salvation here. 7 years ago, he managed to survive, but now he intended to either find a way out or stay here forever. The young man walked along the dark, silent streets, his head lowered low and clutching a backpack in his hand. His face remained impenetrable, but inside the storm of emotions raged. Suddenly, the light flashed ahead, forcing him to freeze for a moment. The invisible force pushed the guy back, not allowing him to get closer, but he stubbornly continued to move forward. An unusual sight unfolded before the destroyed houses. Bright pink flowers bloomed. It turned out that inside the zone of alienation of the white fog there was its own ecosystem. This discovery struck it. The young man thought. For him, this place turned into something more than a fatal trap. It was his new house. He decided that Xuan and Grandfather Mu would tell about this when he sees them again. Having knelt down, the guy scooped up his palm with a clear, crystal-clean water. Later, making a bonfire, he took a little food left by Xuan and began to cook dinner. The aroma of the prepared dish filled the air, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel calm. The guy picked up a spoon and tried this amazing taste that gave him strength. The next moment, another attack began. The young man in confusion released a spoon out of his hands. It was temporary blindness, clenching his fists. He closed his eyes. It should have lasted only a few seconds. When the guy opened his eyes, everything turned out to be different. He didn't blind and saw the world around him. Strange inscriptions appeared on his hand. With surprise, the hero read them. These were rules. The young man thoughtfully scratched his chin. He could not understand what it was and why he appeared on his hand. The rules should be strictly observed. Imminent death expected the violators. Some of them seemed absurd. Others had rational grain, but in general they looked strange. It was impossible to cry. It was necessary to respond within 3 seconds and much more. With sadness, he thought that he only did not have enough rules. It seemed unthinkable. The young man tried to recover and understand what happened to him. The rules of the forbidden alienation zone where they came from. Having thoughtfully read it again, he noted key points. You can't attack other people. You can't cry. You need to answer appeals, not insult others, and of course, wash your hands. The guy involuntarily exhaled. It is good that before eating he washed his hands, otherwise he would already be a corpse. The worst thing in the alienation zone, you can die at the same moment as you break the rules. However, if EX saw the rules of the forbidden zone, this could mean that he had immunity. The young man again tried to take advantage of his ability, but he was again a failure. To his great disappointment, the guy realized that he could not control this force. Having thoughtfully scratching his chin, he remembered that yesterday the ability appeared after he tried an ordinary tail. In the studies that the young man read about the monsters, it was mentioned that the awakening of supernatural abilities is possible after eating meat. You need to eat more to see all the rules. Meanwhile, 30 kilometers west of the alienation zone, in the night guard camp, a strong, muscular guy looked at the phone and thoughtfully studied the information. In the zone of alienation of White Fog 22, energy fluctuations in crystals were found. You need to immediately find out the cause. The guy squeezed the stone with force and shouted to the team that it was urgent to gather, whether it was Blue, the captain of the night patrol. The next moment, the door opened with a noise, and several people entered the room. Yang Hu resolutely reported that he was ready to start surgery. He was part of a specialized night battle group of the night patrol. Zhao Lan, sniper of the watch, also reported the full readiness to fulfill his obligations. Zhu Xiaoen, a representative of the support group, firmly stated that she had already prepared. The young girl drew attention to the captain. He took off the patch, but his wound did not drag on. A little time passed. Li Xin thoughtfully laid the phone. There was tense silence around. The captain announced that he had just received a message. In the alienation zone 22, the energy fluctuations of psychic crystals were recorded. The team should immediately advance. Yang Hu frowned. They risked their lives to get out of the white fog, and now the captain sends them there again. Zhou Xiaoman angrily noticed that Li Xin himself was wounded, and his wound had not been dragged out yet. However, the captain did not want to hear anything, hitting the table with his fist. He struck that crystals are more important than any dangers. They, a night patrol. The team instantly built and unanimously supported the captain without daring to argue with him. Half an hour passed. Crystals were discovered in the area of excretion of the white fog. Li Xin ran to Yang Hu and said that he couldn't continue. The guy should deal with the threat while they come from the rear. Jan Hu resolutely rushed forward. His movement resembled a bright lightning. The next moment, a huge monster appeared behind him, grinning terrible teeth. He quickly rushed into the attack. The team rushed to the side sharply, trying to avoid a collision and escape. But the monster did not lag behind and resolutely persecuted the heroes without giving them time to think. The monster jumped upward, spreading the limbs covered with thick wool. The captain, without taking his eyes, watched him and quickly thought what actions to take. Turning sharply, Li Xin ordered Zhao Lan to detain the monster at all costs, preventing him from catching up with Yang Hu. The sniper instantly aimed, clearly and fearlessly fulfilling this assignment. I realized the guy only said briefly and resolutely pressed the trigger. There was a loud shot. The bullet flew out of the barrel with lightning speed and went to the target. The recoil threw Zhaolan back. Meanwhile, the monster tried to hide. The monster turned around. It published a sickening growl. His eyes burned with wildfire. A moment later, a collision occurred. The monster could not resist and collapsed. Jianhu watched what was happening. The captain thanked his partner for the excellent job. Meanwhile, the monster, panting, lay on the ground and did not move. But suddenly his eyes flashed again with bright, ferocious fire. The monster rose sharply and with a roar, using new forces, rushed to the attack. The captain soared into the air. Spears appeared around him, sparkling with a bright yellow light. Li Xin used the golden technique of 100 flowers, and many weapons rose up. The hero pointed his finger right in front of him, controlling this unusual and magical technique. Thanks to efforts, the young man released a lot of weapons that rushed right on the enemy. The savage felt a powerful attack that absorbed his body completely. The enemy tried to close his hands, but nothing happened, and every attempt to defend himself did not lead to anything. Then the monster published a heart-rending cry that shook the entire space around. Black, incredibly powerful power was released from his mouth. This energy was rapidly torn forward, destroying the golden spears, and approached Li Xin. The young man looked in surprise in front of him, unable to look away from what was happening. The next moment, the guy felt that the enemy's power was too great, and under her influence, the skin on his hand was exposed. The frightened Zhou Xiaomen looked at the captain in horror and saw what had happened to him. The girl approached him and asked him to bite her, so it could be avoided by the effects of magic. Having closed her eyes, she set up her hand, and Li Xin had no choice but to fulfill her request. A moment later, Zhou Xiaomen was surprised to find that the skin on her friend began to recover. However, it was too early to celebrate the victory. Li Xin sharply removed his girlfriend. The monster opened his sharp claws and again approached the captain. But the guy was already preparing to repel the attack. His gaze was full of determination. Now he knew what to do to win. The young man used the golden shield, which provided him with attacks from attacks. The next moment, Li Xin loudly ordered his team to open fire. The bullet rushed forward rapidly, caught up with the monster and pierced it through. The savage roared a wild cry, but his last moments have already expired. Zhaolan at that time held his gun in his hands. It was from him that a deadly bullet was released. Li Xin thoughtfully said that psychic fluctuations would attract the attention of the monsters. And the monsters in this forbidden zone are so evil that people are not surviving here. Zhou Xiaomen said that he was hoping for Yang Hu, because no one would attack a friend, and he would calmly take out the crystal. The captain agreed and gave the command to go. The company moved on the way back, already approaching the car parked nearby. But suddenly Weather Shin stopped abruptly, feeling a strange smell next to him. Smoke rose in the distance. Probably a bonfire was divorced there, not by chance. The guys looked in surprise in the direction where some kind of food was cooked in the pot. Soon they realized that the smell emanated from the stew, which the guy erupted. While in the forbidden zone, the young man with pleasure bit off a piece of juicy meat, and even closed his eyes with pleasure. However, his meal was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of the team. The young man turned around. Li Xin aimed the golden spear on the stranger and ordered him to name his name and identity. The young man introduced himself as an X and added that he is an ordinary person. But perhaps this is not entirely true. The last remark was alerted by Xinya. The captain came closer and asked what exactly he had in mind. Zhao Len noted that only bandits can live in the forbidden zone of white fog. They have no other way. So Zhou Xiaomen had to bring the detector. The girl resolutely took out the device. Now they will find out the whole truth about this mysterious stranger. Ehai. He peacefully raised his hands and did not argue. The detector displayed all the information about him. Zhou Xiaomen was surprised to note that there are no records of crimes. There is no personal information, and the indicator of extrasensory abilities is extremely low, level 5 or even lower. However, Captain Li Xin did not believe it, as he could be here, someone 5th level. Meanwhile, he looked at the formidable captain with fear, hoping that he would not kill him. He thought how to act. The young man sweated with fear. But suddenly his gaze fell on a plate with food. He turned to the team and invited them to bite. The guys stared at the food in confusion. At that moment, a suspicious rustle was heard behind them. Monsters were approaching. Li Xin instantly reacted, grabbing his weapon. He warned that the herd was moving towards them. Probably, the shot attracted their attention, and now the enemies were approaching. Li Xin gave orders. Zhou Xiaomen should grab the guy and leave with him, finding out the whole truth, and the task of Zhao Len to cover her. The guys agreed with the order and prepared for the commission. However, Zhou Xiaoman worried about the captain and asked how he would fight the monsters. But Li Xin was not afraid. He resolutely stated that he would delay the enemies. The captain noticed that this boyfriend is clearly hiding something, and Zhou Xiaomen should take him to clean water, delivering him to a safe zone. Meanwhile, the guy entered the battle. Powerful energy concentrated around him, and the savages, screaming heartily, rushed to him. With tears in the eyes of Zhou Xiaomen, she whispered quietly to the captain so that he was careful. Meanwhile, he tried to hide. Grandfather Mu always said not to contact psychics. In the Forbidden Zone, only poachers and bandits. Who knows what they can do with him? The young man approached the pot, deciding that it would be best to just get out of here. But he couldn't pick up the pan. Zhou Xiaomen resolutely grabbed a stranger and stated that he would have to go with them. The guy desperately resisted, begging him to leave him and allow him to take the food. Psychics had an innate superiority over people, even though the Kingdom of Dragons and the entire alliance established a rule prohibiting harm to ordinary people. The sense of their own greatness did not allow them to treat them as equal. During the search for food with Xuan, they always tried to avoid people with abilities. Zhou Xiaomen was already pulling forward, and the guys quickly rose into the air. The guy's face was distorted with fear. His eyes were glass. He could not even imagine what expected him. The next moment he shouted in horror, suddenly feeling a sharp pain in the lower back. The young man tried to explain that he had a curvature of the spine and with such actions a stranger can break him. However, Zhou Xiaomen did not listen and just ordered him to shut up. Suddenly, a ill-fated wall appeared in front of them. The guy's eyes widened with fear. Suddenly, a gold statue rose at the battlefield. It was a psychic that looked very impressive. Zhou Xiaomen confirmed. The guesses of it that it is really a Captain Li. Li Blue was noticeably transforming. Squeezing his weapons, he rushed into battle. The monsters fell in confusion, and fragments from the explosions were scattered around. Meanwhile, the golden statue inflicted powerful strokes, leaving not a single chance to the opponents. He noted with admiration that he had met many people with super resistance, but he saw such power for the first time. Zhou Xiaomen was condescendingly explained that they are not just psychics, but a team of night patrol. All this time the girl was holding in her hands, taking him further and further. Having clasped his teeth, the young man realized with horror that they almost got out of the alienation zone. He suggested that the invisible wall is very close. If they are getting into it at such a speed, the young man would definitely turn into minced meat. Trying to prevent the inevitable, he suggested stopping and taking a breath, but the girl refused. In desperation, the guy exclaimed that he would die if they crossed the bridge, but his companion did not listen. Probably. These are the rules of the night patrol to comply with the leader's clear order. But suddenly, the thought dawned on the shy. Maybe he will be able to use these rules. Closing his eyes, the young man focused and was mentally in another dimension. The invisible wall extended in front of him, but there was a way out. Meanwhile, Zhou Xiaomen was approaching the barrier, and he clearly saw it. The guy tried to collect all the thoughts together. What kind of invisible path this is? Suddenly he was dawned on the guess. An invisible path. This is a path that cannot be seen. He understood that he can be overcome only by closing his eyes. This is the only way. Everything happened instantly. Zhou Xiaomen suddenly crashed into an invisible wall and fell, and he flew a few meters forward, collapsing among the wreckage of stones. The next second, the young man raised himself and stared in a stunned in front of him. He looked at this lawn for 7 years, but he could not get on it, and finally he managed to get out of hell. Covering in incredible inspiration, the young man lifted his fists up and shouted that he was finally free. Soon the young man was in a tent where the interrogation was waiting for him. He was to tell every little thing about himself. Zhao Lan carefully wrote everything in a notebook. He specified that he was only 17 years old. The next moment, the guy reported banal things about his field, clarifying that he was a man. Zhao Lan carefully looked at the stranger and asked what he was doing in the alienation zone. He answered that everything was obvious. He just prepared the stew and even offered to treat himself. But when the team came, he did not have time to eat, and now he completely lost his food. Zhao Len resolutely put the pen on the table and noticed that the forbidden zone of white fog is so dangerous that the mortality of ordinary people there reaches 99%. Did he really knew about this? The guy sighed and admitted that, of course, he knew he came there to die. Zhao Lan squinted, went close to the prisoner and advised him not to joke with a night patrol. But their conversation was suddenly interrupted by the opening door. Zhou Xiaomen stood on the threshold, holding the wounded captain. Zhao Lan immediately paid attention to Li Xinye and asked how he feels. The captain replied that he would live, He was stunned at the table and watched these strong people. This guy alone coped with the horde of monsters, turning into a golden statue. Li Xin, meanwhile, studied the notes collected about the EX, and noticed that he was an ordinary person. But why he remained in the exclusion zone for 7 years? Crossing his arms over his chest, he said that he wanted to get out, but he was held by an invisible wall. This news puzzled the captain. He admitted that he had never heard of anything like that before. He began to tell his story, which began 7 years ago. When the young man told all this, Zhou Xiaomin could not restrain the bitter tears of sympathy. The girl said that it was unfair. Li Xin puzzledly noticed that, according to the words, he has some special visions, but it is difficult to attribute to the 5th level psychics, because this level is clearly not about their guest. Turning to Zhao Lan, the captain ordered to check the vision of the young man. The guy picked up a sharp knife and said that he carefully watched every movement. The next moment, the warrior made many quick strokes, dissecting the air. Then he asked how many times he waved with a knife. He unmistakably replied that there were 67 of them. Li Xin recorded the data obtained in a notebook, a superlace, a special vision and excellent vision. This corresponded to a minimum of the 3rd level. The captain gave an order to verify the E-wing. In the event of problems, it is necessary to open the intestines. Zhou Xiaomin dragged the guy to the room, and the frightened E. She was begging not to touch his guts under any circumstances. Thoughtfully looking at the young man, Zhao Lan asked the captain if he could trust him. Li Xin again turned to the documents and noted that the guy was unlikely to tell the truth. But he also does not look like a bad hero. Meanwhile, he was in the ward, where he saw a spectacular nurse. The young man could not look away from the beautiful creation, fascinatedly watching the cute lady who appeared. The girl went up to him and extended her hand to his cheek. The guy trembled with excitement. She introduced herself. Her name was Nu, and she was responsible for examining people in the camp. The next stage, vision of vision, the girl took out a board with symbols. He looked thoughtfully at her. It was the Sivtsev table. He often met in the ruins of the Forbidden Zone. He closed his eyes for a moment, and then decided to look at the situation from the other side. The next instant, the young man opened his eyes wide. His gaze focused on the table. He tried to consider her smallest details. The letters were clumsy and clearly visible. It seemed incredible. In addition, the young man was surprised to find that he could even see through objects. Nu asked the guy to pay attention and say which way the specified letter was looking at. However, it was too shocked if he is able to see through objects. Perhaps this applies to people. He focused and looked at the nurse, completely studying her image. What the guy saw shocked him even more, and for a few moments he was speechless. A new one was worried about the young man, and asked what happened to him, why he suddenly went his nose, because they simply checked his eyesight. He could not recover after what he saw, because he examined everything, even through the new clothes. Meanwhile, a document containing all the information about the personality of the young man was ready. He read him, and found out that his level is allegedly 3, or C, a fairly high result. Novaya turned to the guy and noticed that he probably heard about psychics. Each of them has its own rank depending on the strength and abilities. And the rank of talent is also divided into classes that determine the upper limit of opportunities. As for the ranks A and S, their owners are less than 1% of all psychics. It is extremely difficult to meet such people. As soon as they appear, they become the key goals of the night patrol. There are approximately 4 types of abilities, and 84% of them, superpowers. The remaining types include a ghost beast, mysticism or elemental, but their carriers are much less common. Although the rank of C, only the 4th most important, if it is strengthened, it can be very useful among psychics. He admitted that his ability allows us to see what is not available to others, thanks to his plus rank. Nu reminded that if a guy uses abilities to watch someone, a person can feel it. For example, if you look through the clothes, the guy admitted that so far he is not too experienced in this and little understands. The new one approached and said that his rare talent can be used in the support group. If he enters the Academy of Psychics, he has a chance for free training. He heard about the Academy, the national educational institution where psychics improve their abilities. The best resources and strongest instructors of the Dragon Kingdom are concentrated there. After graduating from the Academy, you can even get into a night patrol, but it is difficult to go there. Only a third of the awakened is selected when he was small. He, like many, dreamed of going there, become an outstanding psychic, and get into a night patrol. He looked hopefully in the eye of the new one, and with excitement asked if she really believes that he had a chance. The girl handed him a card and replied that now the guy is a registered psychic. He could move freely around the city, but should not return to the Forbidden Zone. The young man was speechless. Now he was free, and most importantly, his guts remained in place. A new one laughed merrily and said that it was not worth listening to a bruise. He always scares newcomers as soon as information about his ability is registered. He will be able to do anything. Nobody will care about him. He said thoughtfully that this is excellent. Now the main thing is to find Xuan and Grandfather Mu to tell them about everything. Meanwhile, 18 hours before these events, the black car stopped in the middle of a deserted road. Grandfather Mu crushed his head in crushingly and said that everything that happened, his fault, was lies with his conscience. Xuan replied that their friend, Shi, believes the path through the invisible wall can only be found in the Forbidden Zone. They cannot help him, so it is better for everyone to go their own way. However, the old man hoped that someday they would meet again. Xuan said that it would be so. She promised as soon as he became a psychic, he would return after him. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a powerful explosion that erupted in several quarters. The next moment, an amazing picture appeared before the team. Many giant rhinos rushed right on them. Xuan instantly reacted. She opened the door and said that she needed to immediately get into the car. Meanwhile, a crowd of huge rhinos was approaching. Their echoing clatter echoed along the streets. The black car sharply gained speed, rushing forward rapidly to hide from the threat. Grandfather Mu resolutely threw the box out of the car, hoping to detain the monsters and block their way. However, the monsters easily crushed all the obstacles that rained down on them and inexorably approached. The old man, bewildered, turned to the girl and said that they had nothing more to fight back. All the reserves were over. Shun shouted that she needed to immediately close the trunk. The old man rushed to the door, but the next moment, something terrifying happened. The rhino with burning eyes rushed directly to the car. Grandfather Mu saw a hanging threat. The monster's eyes sparkled with terrible fire. Meanwhile, an unknown hero deftly rushed along the roofs, overcoming all obstacles. It was Yang Hu, who watched what was happening below. The rhino inexorably approached the old man. The next moment, the hero resolutely waved his fist and inflicted a crushing blow to the monster. After the blow, the stranger fell directly into the trunk, painfully hitting his head. The guy was wounded but managed to pronounce that it was urgent to serve gas and go on. The door slammed shut, the rhino was left behind, and the car rushed forward. The monsters surrounded the wounded fellow, with surprise watching how his body began to radiate bright light. Meanwhile, the car was already far away. It seemed that the heroes managed to avoid the chase. Grandfather Mu looked at a bewildered guy. He was seriously wounded, and he clearly needed help. But Xuan advised to start finding out who this person was. Jan Hu noticed that the danger had not yet passed, and offered to get acquainted later. The next moment there was a loud ringing of broken glass. Xuan cried out with shock, and Grandfather Mu was numb with fear. Monster's terrible paws clung tightly at the car door, clutching it with incredible force. Yang Hu realized that this monster would not leave them alone. It would pursue them until he gets away. At that moment the door flew back, the huge raven piercingly, intending to attack. Jan Hu said that he would distract him, and the girl should go further, because very soon they would arrive in the city. Jan Hu extended a bright sparkling crystal and ordered to pass it on to the army. Holding his breath, Xuan suggested that she had a soldier in front of her. The next moment, the young lady grabbed the wheel tightly, gritting her teeth and rushing her gaze forward. Meanwhile, a terrible bird was already approaching a black car. The huge raven grabbed Yang Hu with his monstrous beak. Grandfather Mu was numb with fear. But the next instant, something incredible happened. The guy, gathering his strength, sharply swung and threw the bird to the side. Jan Hu confidently stated that this dull chicken would not stop his guy's eyes burned with rage. The raven was left behind, and the car continued to rush along a deserted street. Yang Hu did not look away from the approaching monster. He said that although they met for the first time, but I'm sure that you can rely on Xuan. The girl should promise that the crystal would deliver. The next second, the guy quietly added that he did not want to die in vain. And before someone managed to stop him, Jan Hu quickly jumped out of the car. Grandfather Mu objected that they could not just leave him, but Xuan reminded that he asked to deliver the crystal. Even at the cost of her own life, the girl looked at the sparkling stone and asked herself, "Is it really so important?" The next moment, the young lady grabbed a crystal that shone with an incredible light. A bright radiance filled everything around, absorbing the surrounding space. This light completely blinded the car and the people in it. Meanwhile, Yang Hu continued to fight fiercely with a terrible bird, striking her. But suddenly, the guy felt a threat behind his back and turned sharply. The next second, the hero was thrown aside, absorbed by a powerful aura that came around. Raven and Yang Hu turned out to be completely shrouded in the mysterious energy that appeared from nowhere. After a moment, the guy collapsed to the ground and the bird flew away. Jan Hu looked in front of him, not believing in what was happening. He saw the flashes of energy nearby, and a relentless question arose in his head. But then the hero dawned on the guess. This phenomenon was not accidental. Was the crystal merged with someone? This discovery shocked the young man to the core. Meanwhile, in the city of Kanhai, where events unfolded, everything happened 150 kilometers from the alienation zone. Grandfather Mu opened his eyes with exhaustion, and without ceasing called Xuan. The girl who was nearby hastened to calm him down, noting that she should tell the commander that the old man woke up. An elderly man, stammering, asked what happened to his granddaughter, because he did not remember anything. The girl replied that he was probably talking about her, after which she pointed her finger to the side. Grandfather Mu in confusion looked in front of him and could not believe his eyes. Xuan was inside the crystal, and scientists in white robes roamed around her, writing something into their notebooks. The girl's eyes were closed. It seemed that she was in an unconscious state. In horror, Grandfather Mu jumped out of bed, and without ceasing, asked what happened to Xuan. The staff tried to calm him down, assuring that everything was not the way he thought. The guy standing nearby noticed that there was no guilt of the grandfather in this. The state of the girl was the result of an unusual phenomenon. The doctor continued to explain that everything happened instantly. Most likely, the old man remembers the moment when he lost consciousness. This happened during the merger of a girl with a psychic crystal. Grandfather Mu was shocked and could not recover from what he heard. Meanwhile, the doctor handed a small tablet on which there was an image of a crystal. He explained that this stone was responding with his granddaughter and integrated her body. Grandfather Mu anxiously asked what would be with the girl now, because she was sharpened inside the stone. The doctor replied that if everything goes well, it will become a strong psychic, as it has outstanding potential. However, the old man could not believe it, and said that he had never noticed anything like this in her. And now he was told that she was not only a psychic, but also quite strong. The guy thoughtfully explained that in some people their abilities awaken later than the rest. It all depends on the fluctuations of people around them, who can suppress and even completely block energy. He then added that there are few documented cases, but it seems Xuan one of these. The guy also noted that although her life does not threaten anything else, so far it is impossible to say that she is safe. The crystal resonated so much that the fluctuations could be seen by the followers of God. This is the most dangerous. Grandfather Mu in horror recoiled back, because he had never heard of the so-called followers of God. The doctor explained that this is a large terrorist group formed by criminals with psychic abilities. They believe that mortals awaken their abilities thanks to fragments of the flesh of a certain deity. And the spread of white fog means a fast transition to the kingdom of God to earthly expanses. For decades, they destroyed the remains of a past civilization, killing the weak in their dreams to clear the entire surface of the planet. The followers of God are sure that only people with strong psychic abilities are worthy of entering the kingdom of God. Since hesitation cannot be hidden, most likely they will come for her and try to force her to enter their ranks. However, Grandfather Mu was sure that his granddaughter would never agree to this. The doctor sighed heavily and replied that this cannot be sure of this. They kill everyone who refuses. If Xuan wakes up, the night patrol in fact will do the same. Therefore, there can be no doubt. Meanwhile, a lot of birds circled over the alienation zone. The guy in a cloak stood on the roof and with satisfaction noted that he found it. The demon spoke on the phone with a rave and said that the girl needs to be delivered if his friend copes with the task. He will become the 9th apostle. On the other end of the wire, the rave grinned and replied that he understood everything, after which he licked bloodthirstily. A bus rushed along the deserted street. Around it was gloomy and monotonous. He looked thoughtfully out the window. Then he turned around and looked around the salon. The next moment, drowsiness suddenly grumbled him. The guy yawned sweetly. However, suddenly the bus braked sharply and the guy hit the seat in front of him. This was a surprise to all passengers who were inside. They unanimously shouted that the driver could warn before sharply pressing the brake. But the driver barked so that everyone was silent. There was a monster ahead. If someone squeaks, they would not be greeted to them all. He looked forward in surprise. He saw the approach of the monster. The guy carefully looked out of the window and tried to make out what was happening. In the distance, there was a huge monster with wings, which leaned over his victim. The beast noticed the gaze of Ehai. His eyes flashed with rage. He looked right at the guy. The young man was numb. In his eyes, the horror froze. It seemed a terrible nightmare. The monster moved forward, waving his paws and clapping his wings loudly. The driver squeezed a weapon in his hands and turned to the passengers, urging them not to panic. In the past, he was a night pattern of rank D. The man got out of the bus and took fearlessly at the approaching monster, clutching his flaming weapons in his hands. The hero promised that he would do everything possible to protect people. He was numbly watched what was happening. He was not a psychic and did not possess combat skills. But the next moment, the young man closed his eyes and mentally told himself that he could not just give up. His consciousness did not leave the thoughts that the guy should do at least something, and not stay away. People right in front of him were completely defenseless and had no abilities. They talked among themselves, and were sure that if the driver could not defeat the monster, then they were all doomed to death. But unexpectedly, I saw the new information that arose before his eyes. The guy turned around. Behind in the seat was a man who was trembling strangely. I realized that this type has the ability to compact the skin. Another gentleman had the ability of Starfare. With great surprise, the young man realized that he could now see their levels. This stranger was a strong man defeated by his fears, and the old man had a brave heart, which, due to his age, could no longer resist evil. He looked thoughtfully at his hands. The guy thought that all the psychics were strong, but it seems that this was not so, not to mention people like him, who were in the support group. The next moment, the young man saw how a desperate bus driver, who intended to protect passengers, fell to the ground. The man rose, energy spun around him, and he said that he had not had fun for a long time, calling the monster to the attack. The driver fiercely accelerated and stated that no one had managed to break him yet. People were in a panic. They had never seen a real battle before and suspected that they were waiting for death. It is strange that there is still no night patrol. One of the audience said that the driver, a veteran of the night patrol D rank, and he must protect them, even at the cost of his own life. But the next moment, the guy felt a powerful blow. The man standing nearby slapped him in the face. The old man noticed that the driver could easily escape, but instead protects people like them. Not to mention the fact that this is really a veteran. Even the current member of the night patrol is not obliged to sacrifice himself in order to save others. The next moment, the old man concentrated energy in his hands and said that his body is almost nothing capable of anything, but he would try to do whatever he could. But then a guy rose from his place and said that a psychic that has the ability to compact the skin. In a stupor, he was sitting in a chair. The winged monster was no weaker than the D rank. Those who are below were doomed to death. The young man suspected that if he went there, he would definitely die. This decision was very difficult to make. But the next moment, he squeezed his fists with force and decided, if this happens, not to leave fate. Therefore, the guy resolutely rose from his place and said that his name is EX. He is also ready to join them. His rank, E, ability, supervision, type, support. The heroes looked at each other puzzled. It is strange that this guy had an E rank and was still a type of support. However, he resolutely stated that people like him can do little in a direct collision. But if he ends up on the battlefield, he could still help. Therefore, the young man confidently offered to go together and defeat the terrible monster. Meanwhile, the battle between the bus driver and the monster continued. The man tightly squeezed a weapon in his hands. Each of his movement was directed against the enemy. However, the hard monster was too huge and ferocious, and was not going to give up so simply. He was decisively shouted to the driver that they were going to his aid, but he was beside himself with anger, and said that he himself almost died, and he had no time to follow inexperienced beginners. He was firmly replied that now is not the time for disputes. The tail of this monster is poisoned. If he hurts a man, only 3 minutes will remain to heal. The driver stared at the guy with surprise and asked what he had just said. He answered that his ability to see information, and so he discovered it. The old man was confused and asked if the guy was sure of his words. The next moment, without waiting for an answer, the hero quickly rushed forward. He released a flame fiery. The driver turned around and looked at the ally with lateral vision. Meanwhile, the fireball was rapidly approaching the bat, a huge monster, their enemy. After a moment, the fireball reached the goal. Around the puffs of smoke and a bright glow rose around. The driver asked what was happening, because smoke blocked his review, and he could not consider anything. The next moment, the man felt a fiery attack on himself and exclaimed in rage that he was painful. The old man admitted that he used smoke to win the time. The hero invited the driver to gather. Its fire is enough to break through the skin of the monster, but it will compress all the wounds, stop bleeding, and will not allow the poison to spread, because, according to the guy, there are only 3 minutes to restore. The driver was confused, surprisingly. This boy really turned out to be useful. Meanwhile, the terrible monster approached. The smoke gradually dispersed, and now the beast saw where to attack. The enemy put forward paws, which were also saturated with poison. However, another fighter instantly blocked this attack. A bright flash flashed around. The guy used the shield with which he repelled the monster's blow and made him retreat. However, the hero said that his defense would not last long, so they need to deal with the monster as soon as possible. In the meantime, he looked in all his eyes at a terrible monster who bared his teeth and stared at him with a piercing look. The young man thought that the winged monster was not a fool. At first, he would attack the weakest, and this is just him. The enemy accelerated in order to make a powerful blow, and he stood still and did not move. The driver warned that this is very dangerous. The guy must take some actions in order to defend himself. He looked thoughtfully right in front of him. In the past, he often had to run away from demons, and often feel the breath of death. Then they were along with Xuan. There were many situations when the guys were in the balance of death, but this remained in the past. Now he knew exactly that he had abilities, and he was a psychic. This guy, a Superman who used a focus and looked carefully at his enemy. Having concentrated visual attention on the subject, the young man could activate the effect of time stopping. He accidentally found out about this when he looked out the bus window, and now it was possible to use this skill. He understood that although the current situation is much more extreme, this gives a chance to survive. The guy looked at the approaching ally, who intended to approach him, but froze in the air. He decided that he needed to try to focus even more, and carefully looked in front of him. The monster put his terrible paws forward, and every second everything was approaching. However, the young hero stood fearlessly in front of him. Everything happened as in a slow shoot. The terrible paw was very close. He looked at her intently and did not look away. The guy thought it was hallucinations, but in fact it was his next movement. Now he understood how it works, because the hero was able to predict the next step of the enemy. So this gives a serious chance of survival. The next moment, the young man resolutely pushed away from the ground, but suddenly a small stone turned out to be under his foot. This made the guy stumble, and he felt with annoyance that he was starting to fall. The next moment, the young man was on the ground, while he painfully hit his head. Meanwhile, the monster intended to strike, but when the fall, it was miraculously managed to move away. The guy felt his head, and muttered that he was very painful after this fall. Meanwhile, the monster tightly squeezed a fist. He foresaw the approach of danger. The young man in a daze watched the black shadow approach him. It seemed that there was no way out. He hoped only that it would be good if the body had time behind his eyes. The next moment the battle began between him and the monster. The young man predicted all the movements of the enemy and therefore did not let him hit himself. The amazed team watched what was happening and was very surprised by all this. The guy noticed that probably this hero, a professional, or he was just a lucky one. But the bus driver said that it was not like luck. It is clear that they have an unusual person. In the meantime, in a panic, he shouted to the team that he should not wait, because a little more, and this monster would devour him. The next moment, the driver grabbed his weapon in his hands and rushed right in front of him. The man prepared a sword to strike and continuously pursued the monster. The next moment, the blow was delivered. The hero was very cleverly able to defeat the enemy. The man said that everything was fine. Now the danger has passed. You need to get out of here as soon as possible. Meanwhile, a man was sitting on the roof of a large building. A donkey was next to him. The old man looked thoughtfully. He did not utter a word, but some thoughts constantly wandered in his head. The next moment, the hero's gaze sank down. Doubts crept into his soul. Meanwhile, the bus stopped at Kanhei Station. He left the vehicle. However, the old man who helped in the battle came out with the guy. He wanted to tell him something. The old man said that there are no strongest psychic abilities. There are strongest people. Perhaps the rank is not high, but the guy may become strong. The driver of the bus with a mockery noticed that it also seems to him that this guy is quite worthy to join the night watch. The next partner, who also took part in the battle, showed his finger up and smiled. The young man looked at them in surprise. He did not expect to hear this, and was very confused. The next moment, the guy waved his hand goodbye to them and thanked for such kind words, promising at the same time that he would try. Now it was necessary to solve the following issue. It is necessary to find Xuan and Grandfather Mu. Suddenly, the young man saw the announcement on which the phone number was indicated on which it was possible to talk about work. He stumbled upon one guy who was holding the phone in his hands and decided that this was his chance. The young man approached the young man and asked to lend his phone for a while. However, the passerby was clearly dissatisfied with this request and looked angrily at the young man who appeared. The guy waved his hands and said that his cell phone could save his life and that he could not lend such a valuable thing. Does this strange type do not have his own? He was good-naturedly admitted that he did not have it yet, because, probably, it is quite expensive. The stranger said that after 12 years, everyone is obliged to buy a cell phone in order to be able to report the danger. And after a moment, the guy pointed his finger towards the strange type and noticed that he was probably that foreigner. He thought with chagrin that he was mistaken for a bandit, and it was rather sad. Meanwhile, the stranger said that he saw a suspicious man who, supposedly, was an agent of the followers of God, and looked very strange. At the other end of the wire, they asked that the person who turned to describe this suspect. The young man turned around and stared intently, trying to make out all the details. However, his surprise was great when, in the place where he had just stood, it turned out to be empty. The puzzled young man looked around, not understanding where he could disappear. He took a breath. He almost got into trouble, but fortunately managed to hide in time. Thanks to his abilities, the guy noticed that his pulse became significantly more frequent, and the hostel's hostile mood was obvious, so he instinctively escaped. But what this person had in mind when speaking about the followers, who they are, he felt how the stomach treacherously rumbled from hunger. In addition, he suddenly realized that he was lost, and wondered why so many misfortunes fell upon him. Suddenly, a noise was heard nearby, and the hero looked forward with caution. The huge iron door slowly opened. It was opened by a thin female hand. This girl was called Dudu. She, yawning, went outside, without suspecting anything. The next moment, the young lady opened one eye and saw a stranger in front of her. For several moments, they silently looked at each other, amazed at an unexpected meeting. She bewilderedly watched a girl that suddenly appeared. But Dudu noted that his innocent look, a rarity in the modern world. Resolutely approaching him, she carefully looked into his face. Then, leaning closer, asked if he wanted to go inside. The girl added in a whisper that you can have fun, drink, and rest. He was puzzled. The young man pulled away, not understanding what was happening. His thoughts were only busy with the fact that he was terribly hungry and had not eaten for a long time. Meanwhile, Dudu looked at his face with curiosity and asked what his name is and how many years. Suddenly, another girl approached them, Lily, who suggested that a friend had already had a client. Lily looked sad, because this guy was very pretty to her. Dudu cast a fierce look at her, but Lily could not look away from the young man. However, Dudu did not pay attention to her and again turned to She, repeating her question. When she recognized his age, she gladly noticed that she did not long remain until adulthood. Lily decided to cool her ardor and, winking, clarified that the guy was only 17 today. He looked at the girls with confusedly, and when the stranger suggested confirm this, he was only silent. But the next moment, the guy exclaimed that it was not worth carrying nonsense, because he vowed to a night patrol that he remains a law-abiding citizen and would not do anything wrong. The girls looked at each other, not understanding what this unusual gentleman is talking about. And then they burst into a loud laugh. This guy was funny. Dudu said that Red Romance, a well-known brand, and not some kind of dubious organization. Lily asked what their 17-year-old brother would say now, and her friend noticed that the young man seemed to die of hunger and suggested feeding him. The girls took him with him, promising that a friend will be very enough soon. After some time, the table was littered with empty plates. He felt satiety with pleasure. The guy had not eaten so tasty for a long time. The girls looked at him in bewilderment, suggesting that he was kicked out of the house due to a lack of food. Dudu asked why the hero travels along Hanhao alone. Was she really looking for someone? Having a look, the young man admitted that he had lost his sister and grandfather and really wants to find them. Dudu sincerely sympathized with him, because the searches could drag on, and during this time he risked to die. He said that he would like to find a job, but did not know what he could do. Lily thoughtfully remarked that they just did not have enough waiters. Perhaps the guy would be interested. The work is simple. You just need to carry tea and other drinks. She warned that the salary consists only of tips. He was a little upset, whether there would not even be a minimum salary. Dudu added that many visitors come to their bar, and if the guy will serve them well, she will be able to earn up to 1,800 yen per night. It was inspired by this idea. There was a lot of money, which is very helpful. But suddenly I thought in what sense the phrase was meant overnight. The girls unanimously stated that the level of earnings is completely dependent on the skills. In the soul of the guy, doubts crept in. There is clearly something wrong. In this work lies a catch. But at the next moment, the young man threw back the alarming thoughts. The girls are kind to him. Perhaps he just winds himself up. In addition, we are talking about significant amounts, and this is a chance to get rich and eat the noodles of the sprinkle. Therefore, he resolutely stated that he agreed and wants to become a waiter in Red Romance. The girls were delighted and said that this was an excellent solution. The brother would definitely become the star of the institution Lily, promising to bring him uniform. However, the presence of a uniform was alerted by a guy, and he asked for what this means. Again, there was a feeling that something was wrong here. Time passed, evening came. Many visitors gathered around Red Romance. Some came to drink, others discussed personal affairs, some danced. From all sides there was a laughter and the ringing of glasses filled with foamy drink. He felt uncomfortable in this atmosphere, but accepted the working conditions and even put on a uniform. Young visitors noticed the guy, discussing his beauty among themselves. One of the girls suggested that it was new since she had never met him before. Having stumbled, he confirmed that this is his first day at work. The girls surrounded the guy, noting that it was even better, and asked if he was familiar with the special Red Romance service. However, the guy admitted that he hears about this for the first time. Sister Lily did not tell him anything. Young ladies assured that nothing was afraid. Over time, the guy would get used to it. Nevertheless, the young man was convinced that under no circumstances would be sold for money. Soon it was dawn. It was 4:30 in the morning. The girls good-naturedly said goodbye to X, saying that they were pleased to chat and promised to return a few days later. In big cities, people are looking for someone who will listen, because it is difficult to find a sensitive comrade. Therefore, he did not do anything special. He simply listened to their stories. Despite this, the young man felt confusion. He could not imagine that such a fate was waiting for him. Soon, the young man decisively slammed the door of the bathroom. He had to stay alone. Being under the stream shower, the guy was thinking about how to live in a safe zone. But reality exceeded all his expectations. He could not even imagine that this is possible. He awakened his abilities and left the zone even before it seemed unthinkable. After that, he was taken to a military camp for verification, collecting all the information about him. On the same day, he managed to survive the attack of a dangerous monster. At the end of the day, the young man got a job as a waiter and constantly brought drinks to visitors. The guy washed for a long time under warm water, reflecting on the current situation. Finally decided that he had to explore his abilities and become stronger. Looking in front of him, the guy noticed how in one of the rooms someone had an injection. In another place, games that seemed very entertaining were held. Suddenly, the hero saw a young lady who thoughtfully smoked a pipe on the couch. Earlier, I never met her. It seemed to him unusual but arrogant. Suddenly, Dudu entered the room. The young lady greeted the sister Han, surprised at the meeting. The girl admitted that she had not come here for a long time, and asked the bar with the business. Dudu replied that everything was in order. Today they even hired a new waiter. However, Han was not interested in such trifles. She asked if something happened in Kan Hai. Dudu told that she heard from the policeman. 2 days ago, strong fluctuations in the psychic crystal were seen. It seems that he united with a certain girl under the supervision of a night patrol. Han thoughtfully said that this was valuable information and ordered to follow this girl. He carefully watched what was happening and why this information is so important. But suddenly Han felt something and was alert, putting forward a spear. She turned sharply, wanting to find out who in front of her. Her eyes flashed with bright fire. He suddenly realized that he was noticed. And this turned out to be an unpleasant discovery. The next moment, the young man stopped observation, because he was almost caught red-handed. Meanwhile, Dudu looked at her sister with surprise and asked what happened. Han thoughtfully noticed that they hired a new waiter, and she would like to know more about him. Dudu was instantly alerted. Is it really something strange? A day passed. At lunch, Dudu hurried into the room for a new waiter to call him to eat. She carefully looked inside and asked with surprise, was she still sleeping? However, the guy did not sleep. He performed exercises, pressed out of the floor. For a few moments, they looked at each other. Suddenly, Dudu felt that she could not resist this guy. His body and face were definitely in her taste. The girl could not resist the temptation and wanted to touch strong muscles. Dudu thoughtfully remarked that she had just offered him dinner. It was strange why the guy avoids her. He guessed about the girl's intentions and noted that all the employees are here. It is better to observe personal boundaries and not touch anyone. The girl indignantly said that in just one night this guy was picked up stupid thoughts and learned bad. The young hero decided to translate the conversation and said that he would go down as soon as he dressed. Dudu recalled that last night the guy had already used some ability to peep and was sure of his rightness. The statement was taken by surprise. For a few moments he silently looked at the girl without answering. A little bewildered, the guy said that he does not understand at all what the colleague is talking about. But Dudu resolutely pressed him against the wall and said that it was not worth unlocking, although this place looks like a brothel. In fact, it is a reconnaissance center. From the very beginning, the young lady knew about his psychic abilities and possibilities of she. Speaking with surprise, the young man asked what they want from him. Dudu resolutely approached. Does he really not know? This hero is able to see human secrets. It would be stupid not to hire him. In the head, something began to clarify. If hired, we'll have to be forgotten about freedom, so he decided to refuse. However, the girl objected why to refuse such a sentence. This guy is perfect for them. He firmly stated that he was not going to be only an informant. He wants to go to the alienation zone and become stronger. Turning around, the young man went away. He was pleased with attention. But the guy was not going to linger here for a long time. After a small pause, he said that in the alienation zone it could die. But for that is the reason. Dudu interrupted him in a half and noticed that there was no need to talk about everything. Everyone should have their own secrets. The girl also said that 77 alienation zone was recently cleaned of monsters and is not so dangerous now. Many go there in search of the remains. Probably the guy also wants to try. Then the Dudu handed out the phone and said that he could take him with her. She warned that there was no chip in him, so there was no worrying about surveillance. The girl added that they were recorded on the phone from Lily. If the guy ever changes his mind, they will always be happy. For a moment he was speechless and did not know what to say. Dudu looked at him with hope and asked, perhaps a friend had already changed his mind. But he only pronounced the words of gratitude. Without hiding the grief, the Duda turned away and the guy looked at her puzzled. The next moment, he sincerely thanked her for everything and promised to try to return. Red Romance. This is an underground reconnaissance center that collects information from reliable sources and sells it at high prices. Although the business is illegal, employees liked it. The guy looked thoughtfully at the map. His abilities slowed down in development. Perhaps if they appeared in the alienation zone, in the same place they can intensify. He looked once again at the map. There was 77 alienation zone. The hero should go there. Several hours passed. Several tents stood in the middle of the noisy highway, and the sentries walked around. The guy walked down the street. Other passers-by hurried about their business. Suddenly, loud voices rang out. They reported that there was a set of hunters with a rank with and above. The team needed a temporary employee such as support for the study of the environment, with a good salary. When he passed by, one of the guards tried to find out something from him. The guy said that he had business in the alienation zone, and looked at the man puzzled. However, the fighter said that he was behind him, but they lack one person. He activated his abilities and carefully examined the fighters. All of them were D and from the rank. The team is strong and hardy, capable of achieving a lot. After a short pause, the young man said that his rank, not so high, only E. The fighter laughed and asked what he was going to do in the alienation zone with such a rank. At best, return home to mommy. But unexpectedly, he felt an approaching threat impending at a huge speed. His abilities worked instantly. A danger was already concentrated over the fighter's head. In the next instant, a huge spider appeared out of nowhere from nowhere, releasing its threads. The man turned around in fear. This was a complete surprise for him. The warrior looked ahead, but the threat was inevitable. He thought with regret that it was a pity that this fighter if he died. Now the young man understood that it would always be so. The leader would throw his partners as soon as a real threat appeared. It is better to stay away from them. Therefore, without saying anything, he went away, not going to continue the conversation. However, the fighter noticed that the guy was going in the wrong direction. It was strange why he was doing this. The man pointed out the exit and said that it would be safer there. He thanked for anxiety and said that it doesn't matter. The guy would enter the alienation zone even alone. The man turned to the team and noted that this guy was very strange, possessing E. Still wants to enter the alienation zone alone. He calmly replied that the responsibility for his life lies with him. It is better than relying on a captain who will run away at the slightest danger. The fighter was puzzled and asked that he was carrying, as this can be said. He said that he would not repeat, because for the leader this guy is only another future dead man. The team looked with fear after the departing young man, not understanding what he was talking about. Only the captain realized the meaning of his words, because indeed the man cherished only his own life, and under the slightest threat, was ready to leave his people. In the meantime, he went to a safe distance. The weakest among this group had a rank, and the young man with a rank did not dare to enter into conflict with them. Even if he is accepted into some team, most likely he is used as cannon fodder. Therefore, there was no choice left. It was necessary to go alone on a dangerous journey. The guy raised his head. The white fog covered the entire area of the passage zone. According to the information of Dudu, its density changes from place to place. Closer to the entrance to the alienation zone, the fog is more stretched, thick, and unpredictable. The guy opened the compass and looked at him. Usually the teams purchase special devices to pass such places. However, he could not afford such a luxury, which was annoying, but fortunately, his superpowers could help in this difficult path and tell a lot. The young man easily saw through the fog. Suddenly, something unexpected attracted his attention. The foggy demons, the creatures of the white fog that are not a serious threat. Their power is equal to the psychic of the D rank. They wander in the fog in search of confused travelers, but those who hold on the upper course are almost not touching. The guy thought there was no danger. These creatures would not attack him. Although the Zone 77 has become less dangerous, the remaining monsters still posed a mortal threat to treasure hunters. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the fog. One of the monsters looked there in surprise. The car rushed at great speed. The monster barely managed to bounce, and the car crashed. Behind the group was driving. Each person had marked clothes. They rushed in a massive iron machine, accelerating to the limit. Suddenly, the commander shouted that a car was ahead. It was necessary to stop. The man at the wheel in surprise turned to Captain Wu Lei and asked if something was wrong. The guy replied that he felt strong paranormal fluctuations, but was not sure where exactly. Looking around, the team decided that you should not focus on the little things, and continued the path. Meanwhile, he hid behind the garbage tank. Sister Dudu said that many psychics go to the exclusion zone in search of treasures, but most do it illegally, without a license. The guy took a breath if one of these, for example, will catch a night patrol. He will be forcibly taken out of the zone or even put him in custody. It's good that he was not noticed. This time the young hero was very lucky. Suddenly the hero again felt the presence of the rules, as if they were reminded of themselves. Now they soared in the air. The young man did not understand what was happening. This is the same wording as last time. The guy could see the laws of the zone from the moment of entry, which was a very curious phenomenon. I read it, the violation will lead to punishment or even death. But if you observe everything, then you can move freely. The young man decided to remember them and began to repeat them. The first rule forbade to attack people. The second was similar. He spoke them several times so as not to forget. Soon the guy went on, carefully following the environment. Visibility has improved. It seems that the fog will soon dissipate, and it will be directly in the alienation zone. Suddenly a beast appeared due to a turn. His eyes flashed in the dark. He froze. It was a wolf. The situation was alarming and very unpredictable. Often simple predators in the alienation zone mutate in terrifying monsters. The power of this beast is no less than that of D rank. For a few moments the guy froze, silently studying the enemy. A second later, the wolf opened his mouth slightly and made a sound resembling laughter. I carefully looked closely. With this beast there was something wrong. The guy frowned. This is an ordinary Jusk, looking friendly. However, even so, the hero did not weaken vigilance all the same. This is an alienation zone, and any creature that has survived here is dangerous. The guy prepared a knife. If the animal attacks, we'll be ready. But the dog sat on the ground, continuing to wave his tail and looking at the stranger with curiosity. A minute later, Husky leaned and thoughtfully scratched his ear, still wagging his tail. He was confused. This beast did not look aggressive at all. Is it really a really ordinary husky which is not a threat? A few minutes passed before the young man understood. The animal is not going to attack. The young man thought, the dogs have excellent scent. Perhaps he smelled meat in his bag. He decided to check this and took out a piece of a fresh glass from a backpack. Husky instantly perked up, froze, and with all her appearance showed what this piece wanted. The guy did not begin to tease the animal and threw the meat that he held in his hand. The dog eagerly opened her mouth, intending to catch the tidbit right in the air. He still could not trust this beast, even if Husky looked cute. In fact, they could be very dangerous. But the next moment, the beast that wanted to grab the meat felt a powerful blow. He missed, and the piece hit him right into his head. In a daze, he watched this strange phenomenon. The guy took his words back. In fact, this animal was a real fool. Leaning towards the husky, he said that he continued to eat, and said that he still had many pieces. After that, the young man rose, waved a beast for goodbye, and gathered on a long journey. But the next moment, he realized that Husky decided to go with him. The young man tried to drive away the dog and said that he would not interfere under his feet. The next moment, he looked at the dog again. Did she really decide to follow him? The guy thought and carefully scanned the dog to determine his rank and strength. It turned out that this dog was a demonic wolf of the sun and wanted to become his companion. He could not restrain laughter. This stupid dog is actually a terrible wolf. Why not really tame it? The young man decided that his new friend would be the name of Simba. For good behavior, the guy promised to reward him with meat. The night passed, and morning came. Several people moved along deserted streets. One of the travelers noticed that to find a psychic crystal or an artifact here, the task is almost hopeless. However, the second said that, although it is difficult, it is not without reason that their price starts from $1 billion. The third thoughtfully admitted that you should not worry. Even if there is nothing valuable, you can earn on the remains of monsters or rare herbs. The leader instantly stopped all disputes and said that due to these conversations you can bring trouble. One of the rules of the alienation zone stated that it was impossible to insult others. So the guy immediately felt retribution. The earth suddenly cracked, and something amazing appeared from there. The next moment, the captain of the team Zhao felt this terrifying effect on himself. The guy barely managed to move away, bounced to the side, sat down on a stone and took a breath. After a moment, the monster disappeared. Everything happened too quickly and unexpectedly. Jiu said that he was lucky. It's good that the guy had a shield. He must have said something wrong. The team instantly closed their mouths. No one knew what could be said and what was not, and everyone was afraid of the consequences. Now it was not clear how to survive. Without an energy shield to psychics below the B class, it would be extremely difficult. One of the travelers, trembling with fear, turned to a friend and said that the monster would surely attack them. The second agreed. It was obvious that the terrible beast was not going to be friends with them. But the next moment, the guy pointed right in front of him, attracting the attention of a comrade. Jiao asked displeasedly what they saw there and why they were so suddenly wary. The skeleton appeared ahead. Probably it was a man who died and was in this place for too long. Meanwhile, he was approaching the remains. The guy said that, unfortunately, this person is already dead, and he could lend his clothes. The team watched this unknown young man spoke with the skeleton and asked not to be offended, and then not far away the bonfire. The bald man thoughtfully asked the rest whether he sees correctly that this guy is completely alone. The second noticed that there was some kind of monster next to him, quite dangerous. Jiao said that the guy has a gray mantle. He knows how to control the monsters and seems to make some strange rituals. The conclusions of the team were unequivocal. Did they really have a follower of God? Observing from afar this unusual young man, they could not find another explanation. Meanwhile, he turned to his faithful dog and said that you should not let saliva. First, you need to fry the meat. The team continued to observe. Probably this guy is afraid to violate the rules of the alienation zone. There are rumors that one of the apostles of God received immunity from punishment. Now they did not know what to do to kill a stranger or leave alone. Jiao, turning to the team, noticed that it makes no sense to kill him right now. They do not know who he was actually and how strong it is. For starters, you just need to observe. The guys decided to listen to the more experienced Jiao and do as he says. Meanwhile, the preparation of meat continued. One side was already fried, and an appetizing aroma was overlooking around. Soon, the young man informed his dog that the meat was ready. But the attention of Simba attracted something else. The guy in confusion looked at the dog and asked what happened. It was strange why the dog was so wary. Suddenly the earth broke through. Loud blows and strange sounds were heard. He raised his head in surprise. Above him a terrible monster with huge strong claws. The guy in a daze looked forward what was happening. This beast looked quite dangerous. A giant scorpion. His sting can instantly kill a person. If the victim tries to resist, huge claws will repel all the desire from her. This predator still moves underground so quickly. The young man lurked behind the wall and reflected on how he would continue to act. He held out his hand to the knife in the hope of defending himself from the attack. But the next moment the guy turned around, because his dog was not going to retreat. Simba with a formidable growl attacked Scorpio and clung to him with sharp teeth. The dog felt an approaching threat, because the enemy had already prepared his mighty tail to hit it. However, Simba showed incredible dexterity and dodged the attack. He watched what was happening in confusion. Simba sank to the ground a few meters from him. The young man noticed that his dog was fighting like a real demonic wolf. Now there was no trace of the good and cute husky. The eyes of the beast shone with a wild flame. He decided to cheer up a faithful friend, and waving his fried steak, said that if Simba wins, he would receive a mountain of meat. This incentive was quite tempting, so the dog joyfully wagged his tail and barked. The next moment, Simba with unprecedented rage attacked Scorpio. The dog was moving harmoniously and quickly, preventing the enemy from recovering. Simba waited for the moment and clutched his teeth into the enemy's body, growling violently. Soon he prepared for the next attack, but the enemy managed to evade. Aisha thought that their forces were equal. Simba is incredibly vague, but Scorpio has a strong defense. It may be worth looking for a weakness of the enemy. Applying his superverse, the guy focused on scanning the enemy. A few moments passed, and the young man began to understand where the vulnerable place is located. The vision of the exit prompted that this creature really had an unprotected area. Therefore, the guy said that Simba should attack the last segment of the enemy's tail. The beast resolutely rushed to the attack, using all his dexterity and strength. A moment passed and Simba made a jump, opening his mouth to stick his teeth into the enemy. Soon the dog succeeded. His sharp fangs dug into the tail of the enemy. It was a good strategy. Scorpio howled in pain, realizing that he was in danger. He joyfully encouraged his faithful friend. Simba held a wonderful attack. Meanwhile, the dog again attacked the enemy and again dug his teeth. Scorpio collapsed to the ground, painfully hitting hard stones. The enemy began to quickly break the soil to hide. He praised his faithful friend, saying that he was a great fellow. But suddenly the guy felt the movement behind him and turned around. Meanwhile, the team, watching the battle, noticed this fight. A guy who was able to control monsters seemed strange to them why he himself was not fighting. Perhaps this is a puppeteer. However, Zhao threw these guesses. It cannot be that the apostle of the followers of God was just a puppeteer, and that one of their leaders could have done in this place. The guys agreed with the commander. This guy was too weak, and so he forces his pet to fight. You can attack him, and then demand a reward for his head. He looked down and said that this is a good strategy for them. The team raised his head in confusion. They did not expect this guy to follow them. Zhao asked in surprise how he managed to get upstairs and eavesdrop on their conversation. However, he did not begin to reveal the truth to them. The guy was interested in something else, with which they took that he was a puppeteer. In the soul of the opponents, doubts crept in. Perhaps this is really a follower of God, but he is here alone, or rather with a dog. In any case, they have 3 strong and hardy fighters, which gives an advantage. In addition, if you look at his clothes, you can notice that it is cheap. It is unlikely to be an experienced psychic, but one of the guys still said that it was worth being careful. He observed the fluctuations of these people. Are they really not going to attack because the rules prohibit aggression? Probably, they do not know about them. Otherwise, they would not even dare to touch him. But since it is not known, nothing prevents psychics from killing him. Getting into a faithful friend, he thought that even Simba could not cope alone. The guy could die. Although they will be punished for violation of the rules, this will happen after he is dead. The hero was sure that they did not read the published set of laws, and therefore did not know that it was forbidden to kill his own kind. Bewildered, the young man thought what to do. Soon he made a decision. Fearlessly stepping forward, the guy asked if they would not recognize him. The young man from the team was alert. If this person asks this, it means that someone is famous for them. Is it really a follower of God? Zhao also believed that this guy would not dare if he could not defeat them. Another young man also thought that they were largely stuck. If they angered one of the apostles, the followers of God, they would definitely not leave the alive. Raising his head up, Zhao asked who was in front of them. The team stared at the stranger with surprise. However, he was an arrogant tone to begin to introduce himself. The guy himself in his soul was happy that he succeeded and praised himself for his mind. Zhao, turning to him, apologized for rudeness and named his name. The leader of the team possessed extrasensory resistance skills. He turned sharply to him, noticing suspicious actions. The guy stared at X as in bewilderment and asked what he said. He saw how Zhao tried to pull out the dagger, and as a punishment the young man said that he would attack him. If he survives, he would receive forgiveness. In the end, the guy warned that it was better for everyone to shut up and focus on the environment. There was a rule in space. If anyone was called out, this person had to answer for 3 seconds. But the strangers did not know this. Zhao strained, not understanding where to wait for the attack. The next moment, the wall broke out nearby. The guy in confusion stared in that direction. Suddenly, from nowhere, a strange creature appeared and grabbed his neck. Zhao barely managed to free himself from this blow. The unknown beast left. The guy, touching his neck, squinted at the unusual hero. Something was wrong with him. Does this hero have the sang abilities of verbal attacks? Meanwhile, he was rejoiced. His plan worked and asked who would be next. However, the team no longer wanted to take risks. The frightened fighters asked for forgiveness and assured that they realized their mistake. In this case, he peremptorily stated that they should be cleaned and not anger to him. The guys seized the weakened commander and hastily retired. He looked thoughtfully after them. It was lucky that they managed to scare them. If the battle had begun, he would not have greeted him. Now everything ended. It was possible to take a breath and reflect on their position. The guy promised a pet that if he would continue to behave well, he would receive meat for dinner. Meanwhile, a military car drove up to the headquarters and stopped near the entrance. Excited, Jiao opened the door and immediately turned to the head of Wu Lei to report important information. The guy turned around and asked what happened this time, where such a commotion was from. Jiao said that he met a strange guy with the team. His rank is lower than A. Crouching on a chair, Wu Lei asked the subordinate to state everything that happened in more detail. The young man described the stranger. He was in a cloak and a hood, so he could not see his face. But this unknown managed the demonic wolf and used verbal attacks. The team came to the conclusion that he was a follower of God. Having risen from his place, Wu Lei asked for confusion what he said and noted that he would believe if he saw it personally. 4 days passed. In the distance, in the alienation zone, shots were heard and explosions rattled. Simba very quickly passed the transformation and soon became a proud demonic wolf in the rank. With admiration for X, he noted that the pet quickly pumped. Just wonderful. Now the faithful dog easily could cope with the crocodile mutant. The guy watched the fight. The crocodile did not hold out for a long time and collapsed to the ground. He prompted the pet that he needed to bite the enemy by the stomach, his weak place. The guy thought that Simba, although not very smart, but understands the team perfectly, a faithful friend, without hesitation, bit the enemy by the stomach and practically defeated him. He thought with chagrin that a new rule appeared, because of which he could not touch the demonic creature longer than 3 seconds, which is why a faithful friend could not carry it on himself. Meanwhile, a huge bird flew over dense thickets. The raven said that he sees a man in a cloak with a dog, must be the same strange type. When the fighters heard this, they immediately sent the cars forward to find out the details. Wu Lei suggested that the ability of this guy is associated with control, so he warned the team to stay at a distance and only observe. But suddenly the man stopped. An unusual sight arose in front of the amazed fighters. The guys began to look at each other. This is a rather rare phenomenon. Did a new artifact of alienation really appear? Meanwhile, Simba, sparkling with evil eyes, leaned over a defeated victim. He also noticed in the distance the rising pillar of energy and became interested in this. The guy thought about was the birth of some kind of treasure before them. Turning to the pet, the young man said that there is no one else to attack them, so you can go there. The guy and Simba hit the road, wandering through thick trees. Some time passed. He realized that he was wandering around this zone for a week and passed about 300 kilometers, but still has not reached its core. Is it really so huge? Suddenly, Simba raised his head and howled, anticipating the impending danger. The next moment, the guy found a stone monster standing right in front of them. This creature was so huge that he could not completely cover him with his eyes. But then the guy realized that in front of him was a black snake, the keeper of the gate. On the way here, many monsters were destroyed with a Simba, but they have not yet encountered a real strong enemy. With such a keeper, the gate, not only the guy himself will die, but his faithful friend will not be able to contrast anything. Not knowing what to do, he handed the meat to a wild beast, offering a treat. The snakes sparkled the eyes. The animal thoughtfully approached the steak. He hoped that his plan would work, and the enemy would not attack. Outings not lower than a rank, they were lucky to catch the birth of a powerful artifact of alienation, he thought Wu Lei. Squeezing the device in his hands, the guy ordered the team to prepare for capture and be ready. The next moment, the fighters hit the road, because in order to protect the core, the alienation zone will create ferocious monsters that prevent approximation. Suddenly Wu Lei stopped, noticing nearby giant centipedes. He turned around and warned the team about the approaching threat. But the fighters are ready to destroy any obstacle, no matter what it costs them. The leader ordered the activation of psychic abilities. Immediately, the soldiers instantly obeyed and transformed. Having taken a new look, they became stronger and more enduring several times. The transformed team attacked without fear, rushing forward. The centipedes fought off, but sharp blades ruthlessly dissected them in half. Soon, giant insects were completely destroyed thanks to the coordinated work of the fighters. Wu Lei said that this was an obsidian forest, the internal area of the alienation zone, and warned to be extremely attentive. One of the fighters noticed an approaching danger and warned the captain. A huge snake went down from above, and Wu Lei barely managed to bounce to the side. It was a hellish python, a monster, and a rank with elements of darkness. His attacks were poisonous. The fighters noticed that the concentration of monsters is growing, and with every minute it is becoming increasingly difficult to attack. Wu Lei handed over the following order: defend himself and look for a way out. Python looked at the enemy, his eyes burned with wildfire. And Wu Lei transformed into a monster with 3 heads. Radiating an evil growl, he continuously attacked. A flame, deadly weapons of opponents burst from his mouth. The captain released a stream of fire, covering everything around, filling the space. The chaos reigned, and in this turmoil the enemies could not strike. Wu Lei continued to release fire, forcing the earth to shudder. Python did not dare to approach, and the flared chaos forced him to retreat. The team decided that this is a chance. You need to leave while the captain restrains the enemy. Python fiercely looked at the enemy, radiating a poisonous radiance. But the next moment, Wu Lei rushed forward with lightning speed. Python turned around, realizing that he could not cope with this beast. Now he was frightened for his life, but did not want to die. Cautiously following every movement of the enemy. Turning sharply, Python bit Wu Lei, taking advantage of his confusion. Wu Lei cried out, but the poison already penetrated his body. Angry, the fighter prepared for a return attack. Without feeling pain, the hero resolutely rushed at the python and in response, stuck his teeth into him. Python curled up with a ring, and the captain cleverly jumped inside. Wu Lei sank down, piercing the enemy with his gaze, while he released toxic gas out of his mouth. The guy realized that this substance was too caustic and is able to corrode everything. Soon the team approached the captain. The fighters said that they could not cope. It was amazing where so many dangerous monsters came from. Now Wu Lei realized that he had underestimated all the consequences of his stay in the alienation zone. The team quickly ran away, and wild creatures pursued them. Wu Lei said that Plan A failed. Now the main thing is to escape, and not think about the artifact. The artifact is protected by a group of monsters, and now the commander doubted that there was at least one person who was able to cope with them, and in the meantime, he sneezed loudly, because he was the only one who could withstand the monsters. The young man looked thoughtfully into the distance. It seems that there is a serious fight there. But why? Because it is much easier to cope with the guard. You can simply bribe it with meat. He turned to the faithful dog to confirm his words, and said that it was really true. Meanwhile, the guy went on. Simba walked nearby, and Python continuously crawled behind them. 5 hours have passed. He was already tired of the order, but still continued. The guy noticed that the area of the stone forest was more than he expected. After meeting with the snake, the hero has already passed more than 10 kilometers, and still go to the artifact. Suddenly, the earth broke through, and a new barrier arose before EX. The guy in confusion stared at the creature that appeared right in front of him. It was a scorpion and a rank, a wild, fierce monster, who looked very frightening and impressive with its size. The guy scratched the back of the head, a monster and a rank, which was mutating the form of what he had not met before. He first encountered such a strong creature over the entire time of his wanderings in this area. The young man suggested that if he manages to tame him, he may be able to become the lord of this zone of alienation. Therefore, the young hero desperately threw a piece of steak, hoping that the meat attack would work. Scorpio stared in surprise at a piece of meat, which fell nearby. The aroma was appetizing and attractive. For several moments, the monster looked at the steak puzzled. Different thoughts spun in his head. The next moment, the savage took the meat with claws and sent it in his mouth. Now he was triumphed. Scorpio is no longer hostile and is not going to attack. But unexpectedly, the monster looked at the guy expressively, showing with all his appearance that he wanted to eat more. He waved his hands and admitted that he no longer had meat. However, the wild beast was not going to retreat and stared intently at the Simba. The young man tried to explain that he could not be touched. Simba, his younger brother, who could not eat, stammered. The hero promised that he would cook more meat. But a little later, Scorpio thought, squinted and looked carefully at the aliens. A few moments passed, and the monster turned sharply, starting to dig the earth. Gradually, Scorpio was hidden from sight, and Ahai and Simba were closely watched his every movement. Having thought a little, the young man came to the conclusion that the monster had eaten and decided to leave them. He noted with chagrin that the usual methods of taming do not work on monsters in a rank. It's like luring a dog with a meat cake. Only this pie was stubborn, the guy said thoughtfully, looking into the sky. Simba lay on the ground and sighed in displeasure, clearly not agreeing with the words of the owner. The guy hastily stated that, speaking of the dog, he did not mean the faithful husky. A few minutes later, he looked thoughtfully into his bag, and with chagrin discovered that the meat was over. Now he would have to eat soup. At that moment, Simba was alert and looked aside. The guy asked what happened, but the next second, the young hero understood. He raised his head and saw the approaching Scorpio. Another second passed, and a huge pig fell to the ground. Scorpio released it from his claws. He thought that the monster escaped, but it turned out that he simply went hunting. Probably he wanted fried meat so much. Even the monsters have a dopamine dependence. Scorpio really was looking forward to when the young master would prepare an amazing dish for him. At this time, at the location of the artifact of the alienation, there were stone gates and the rank, but their rules remained unknown. The purpose of this team was to search for an artifact of alienation. The three worms and the Bubbles Jack remained to protect the perimeter. The commander ordered everyone else to focus on the gates and keep the defense. The heroes readily responded, promising to fulfill the order. The commander approached the gate. The fluctuations of this artifact were not inferior in force, and the rank, the guy, nicknamed Two Worms, Sledgehammer, noticed that it was possible to destroy the stones constrained by the artifact and thus easily pull it out. However, the commander replied that the rules of the artifact is stronger than any laws of physics. It cannot be shifted to a centimeter if you do not solve the riddle. Turning to the artifact, the guy realized that there was no other way out, except to look for a solution. But suddenly, the voice of the fifth of Treff, the Iron Hand, was heard from above. He stated that they were too careful. "This is just the door, which means that it could be opened," he said. With these words, the hero approached the door. A dense light concentrated around him, but, to his great disappointment, the wall did not move a millimeter. The five Treff, an Iron Hand, looked at it in confusion and could not find a logical explanation. The commander advised everyone to calm down. No matter how much power they put, everything would be useless. However, the five Treff, the Iron Hand, made an important discovery. The artifact was not aggressive. If he were hostile, the hero would be dead. But even after the attack on the door, he survived. The hero asked what to do now. The commander noticed that there was no other way out. It remains only to solve the riddle step by step. The next moment there was an alarm. The team noticed something amazing and offered to distract from the artifact. Just at that moment, the scope of the events approached the place of events. The guy took a breath with relief. Did they really reach? A group of fighters noticed the hero that caused their alertness. He was accompanied by a stone snake and a demonic wolf, the creatures of the rank A, and their intentions remained unclear. The team realized a possible threat and was ready for any outcome of events, even for battle. With the threat, the fighters demanded an explanation, expecting a clear answer. He raised his hands, showing that he was not going to attack. He assured that he came exclusively out of curiosity and only wanted to observe what was happening. The Iron Hand continued to doubt. The personality and abilities of the stranger remained a mystery, which means that he could not trust him. The captain firmly stated that there could be no talk of trust. If you take into account his pets, 3 opponents, while there are 6 fighters, this gave an advantage. Moreover, if the guy does not attack first, then they feared their strength. However, the enemy seemed too calm, and this prompted bad suspicions. The group had a foreboding that he expected reinforcements. The captain came to the conclusion that it was better to hit the first and thereby complete the meeting. He carefully appreciated the situation. Among the opponents there were 3 warfare fighters. A and 3 ranks with the situation remained tense. Meanwhile, the captain resolutely rushed forward. He was sure that the artifact of alienation would go to the strongest. If the guy wants to get him, he must prove that he was worthy. He was regretfully realized that the opponents were not going to listen, and tried to warn them so as not to approach. The sledgehammer was already preparing to attack if the owner is eliminated. His demonic pets would cease to be a threat. But suddenly a scorpion attacked the team, clearly hostile. The captain was numb, realizing that in front of him the creature of the rank A. If the stranger was able to tame such a powerful beast, his own level of force was even higher. He once again repeated the warning, advising not to anger him. But Scorpio has already turned on the hunting regime, studying enemies intently. The guy calmly noticed that even he could not stop the pet if he decides to attack. The captain hesitated, reflecting on further actions. It was dangerous to attack. A second later, the guy changed tactics and offered to agree, and reminded that he was just poachers and not bloodthirsty killers. With one movement of the hand, he ordered Scorpio to stop. Then the guy wanted to understand why the fighters initially showed aggression. It did not seem to him they really intended to kill him, and the hero wanted to know the reason for this decision. The sledgehammer with a grin stated that this is just a misunderstanding. His brother could be calm. However, the captain cut him off, noting that they were a master, not a brother, and he should be respected. Then the captain suggested that the stranger also came for the treasure. He thought and confirmed that we can say so. After that, he asked if the soldiers managed to deal with the artifact. The captain admitted that they had come to a standstill. No matter how hard they tried, it was not possible to extract him. It seems that the appearance of the master here was not accidental, so they were not going to fight with him. Meanwhile, the fighters understood the true plan of his leader. He hoped that the stranger would try to get an artifact, and then they would pick it up at the right time and hide. He was thinking, it is unlikely that these people would be able to solve the principle of operation of the artifact. They simply counted on luck, apparently. The captain intentionally kept nearby, in order to try to take it away at a decisive moment. The young man decided first to get to know this person to understand who is in front of him. He turned to the leader, clarifying his name, assuming that he was in front of him. He called himself Van Wu and confirmed that he was led by the group. He thought the name seemed too simple, possibly false, and the guy decided to check it. The young man called out to Van Wu by name, observing the reaction of the space of the alienation zone. He readily nodded, confirming his authenticity and not ceasing to smile. Then he asked a simple question: how much 1 + 1 will be, giving him 10 seconds to the answer. Van Wu hesitated for a moment and then replied that the answer is simple too. The young man noticed a mistake and warned that he would give another chance. Otherwise, the punishment would follow. According to the rules of the alienation zone, a hailable person must answer within 3 seconds. If the captain's name is really real, he can easily cope. The punishment followed, the earth opened, and the monster burst out. From the blow of Van Wu, he flew off several meters and painfully hit the stones. He crashed to the ground with a roar, raising a cloud of dust and debris. The team rushed to him, asking worried if everything was in order. Barely taking his breath, Van Wu answered that it seems to be intact, but grabbed his wounded shoulder. The Iron Hand turned to Shi with indignation, demanding an explanation that he allows himself. However, the young man calmly replied that this was only a coincidence. He simply asked a question. Then the guy added that the fighters should not think that he was not guessed about their plan. They said that his appearance, fate, but in fact wanted to make him an experimental. The guys in confusion watched an unusual hero, not knowing what to say. After a moment, Van Wu rose, his voice trembled. The villain tried to explain that the master may have been mistaken, because they did not even have such intentions. But the young man did not believe their words. Ultimately, their thoughts no longer mattered. Ishid gave the team a choice of 3 options: leave right now, try to unravel the rules of the artifact with it, or meet death. He allocated for only 10 seconds to think. Van Wu irritated that this short time sounds again. However, after all the efforts spent on the path here, it was too late to retreat. Turning to the 5th of the Treff by the Iron Hand, he asked to ensure him, but the rules of being in this place demanded an immediate response to the appeal. Otherwise, the monster was activated. As soon as Van Wu spoke, the creature got out again. The next moment, the 5 Treffa Pyater, the Iron Hand took a blow, defending his leader. He was disappointedly watched what was happening, realizing that these people never understood his thoughts. However, soon the team knelt down, admitting their mistake. They apologized for impudence, explaining that they had only tried to earn a living. But now they realized and no longer dared to claim someone else's. After that, they hastened to leave the place, dissolving in the air. Van Wu carefully monitored what was happening. He came to the conclusion that this person somehow uses the rules in his favor. If the first case could be attributed to a coincidence, then the second already confirmed its abilities. These laws have complicated the life of people for 200 years, and this hero not only found a way to go around them, but also learned to use in battle. It was probably impossible to cope with such an enemy. Meanwhile, he thoughtfully watched the retreating group. Fortunately, he managed to scare them away, because in an honest battle he could hardly survive. Turning to his dog, the young man noted that the game with the rules of the alienation zone brings unexpected pleasure. However, it was time to return to the artifact and solve his secret. The guy turned to the door, realizing that the first thing to do is to deal with the rules. At that moment, Simba was worried and stuck. The young man drew attention to the behavior of the dog, and then noticed a black flock in the sky. On one of the pillars was a sorcerer, which concentratedly studied the dark forces. This man introduced himself to the 17th believers named Riva. His gaze was a strict and contemptuous, full of hatred and rivalry. He immediately realized that in front of him is a follower of God, as well as probably a terrorist. He sighed heavily. The hero realized that he could not see calmness. His inner voice suggested that this person also claims to be an artifact. Rave confirmed the hunch, saying that the subject of the rank is always attracted by many people, and the followers of God are no exception, but it is impossible to get it without knowledge of the rules. Then the villain expressed doubt. Even if the young man manages to unravel the mechanisms of the artifact, it is not clear how the guy is going to endure such a massive thing without attracting the attention of the night patrol. He only grinned, wondering if the artifact really is the main goal of the demon. The Rave laughed, confirming the hunch. The very fact of the appearance of an artifact was only a coincidence for him. In fact, he came after another. Having a pause, the sorcerer met his eyes with a young man and specified that his real goal was himself. These words shocked the hero. He did not know what to answer. Besides, he could not determine the enemy rank. And this fact could only mean one thing: he significantly exceeded it. The young man tried to assess the situation and was sure that he was able to see the rank and, therefore, before him, either someone level or even S. The rave continued, noting that he did not know how this guy controls the monsters. However, his rank does not exceed B, which means he managed to deceive the group of mercenaries. But this will not work against the demon. Without wasting time, he ordered the dog to attack. Simba rushed forward with a loud roar, rapidly increasing in size. At the same moment, the young man realized that his opponent also has the ability to see information. The rave only smiled good-naturedly, assuring that he was already ready to meet the dog. Simba, dissecting the air, darted towards the enemy, intending to cling to him, but the attack did not reach the goal. He watched with anxiety the fight, realizing that their opponent was too insidious. The dog raised his head, trying to determine the location of the enemy, but he managed to strike. Simba, staggering, took a few steps, but the forces left him. Rive contemptuously noted that this beast overestimated himself, because he is clearly not able to fight. However, the next moment a huge stone python rushed at him. The demon only grinned, noting that these creatures did not know their place. However, it was not difficult to fix this. With one clap of his hand, he threw the snake to the side. With tension, he watched the stones poured from the body of Python. Rave calmly said that he should not resist anymore. In any case, the young man will have to give up. The young hero tensed, watching the approaching enemy, but did not move. Once he told the smart Scorpio that he would not feed him for nothing, he will have to pay. Perhaps the time will come when the young man will be difficult, and then Scorpio will be able to help. The rave was already approaching, reducing the distance with every moment. He asked if the hero understood that he was left alone, and he had no choice. Suddenly incredible, the stones cracked, and a monster jumped out of there. Unknown power rushed to the rave, which was very puzzled by this phenomenon. The next one who appeared out was a powerful scorpion and a rank. Rave realized that this guy may be able to control even such a powerful creature. He knew that Scorpio had a poisonous sting that needs to be eliminated as soon as possible. Otherwise, the consequences would be fatal. Realizing the risk, the demon decided to retreat in order to heal the wounds. Finally, he admitted that he had underestimated the enemy and was defeated, but promised that at the next meeting he would show who the followers of God are. He looked thoughtfully at the removing black figure, which soon disappeared. Then he turned to Scorpio, thanking him for timely help. After that, the young hero looked at his pets, hoping that everything was in order with them. Despite fatigue, Simba and the snake were able to rise and devotedly looked at the owner. The young man realized that his faithful friends risked his life for him and promised to never forget this. Now nothing prevented him from focusing on the riddle that the treasure kept. He could see the rules of the artifact, which inspired hope and forced to think. One of the rules said that it was necessary to read the poem to the gates. This task seemed quite feasible. He thought for a moment, and then said a verse about the Chu River and the gates that will one day fall, changing the flow. At the same moment, massive iron doors trembled, starting a strange reaction. The young hero retreated, watching what was happening in a light stupor. A powerful magical energy gathered around, spreading through the surroundings. He realized that the rule was simple. In the 23rd century, few were fond of poetry. But thanks to the time spent in the alienation zone, he had no choice but to read books. As Dudu said, the artifact is activated using extrasensory energy. The young man touched the door, hoping to convey power. And the next moment, the reaction followed. However, a minute later, he fell to the ground, realizing that his energy was not enough. He lay with his eyes closed, thinking about what had happened. Recently, he had to meet people no weaker from the rank, which made him consider himself strong. But the reality was different. His own rank only E, and his strength was not enough even to fill the 10th of this powerful artifact. However, he soon had an idea. Instead of trying to do everything alone, he called Simba and Snake. When the animals came, the young man began to implement his plan. Meanwhile, panic began in the laboratory. Strong fluctuations were recorded in Module 7. It was urgent to track the data. At that moment, Xuan began to recover. The crystal collapsed, breaking up into small fragments. The girl slowly opened her eyes, feeling strangely. The first to whom she saw was Mu's grandfather. She looked at him in all eyes, feeling an unusual state, but already regaining consciousness. Grandfather Mu was glad that the granddaughter finally woke up. The old man shone with happiness. Xuan asked what happened and where they were, because the situation seemed unusual. Jian Hu suddenly approached them and explained that they were in a military camp. The next moment, Xuan remembered that she had already met this person. The guy with a smile noticed that his face could not be forgotten, and introduced himself, naming his name. However, the girl angrily recalled that it was he who had set the monster on them and destroyed the car, which means that now she must pay for the deed. Yang Hu fell silent for a moment, choosing words for explanation. Meanwhile, Xuan resolutely knocked on the glass, stating that their actions are illegal. But then the young lady heard Yang Hu calmly replied that they themselves did not plan this, and invited her to first look at her feet. Having a bewildered look, Xuan was surprised to find the ice under her. Jian Hu explained that this was the result of a merger with a psychic crystal. The girl had not yet managed to master the new ability to fully, so she had to be temporarily isolated. Xuan shockedly realized that it was the stone that he handed over to her that became the source of her strength. Now everything became clear. She created the ice under her feet herself. Yang Hu assured that she will quickly get used to renewed vigor. But now she needs a vacation. Explanations will follow later. When the guy left the room, he immediately called the captain, saying that Xuan finally awakened. It was good news. Yang Hu said that, according to preliminary data, this young beauty, most likely, was a rank A, and he heard the order that if it was confirmed, she should be sent to the main headquarters immediately, and not allow the followers of God to take the girl. The guy replied that he understood everything, and would do everything possible to protect the psychic. A day passed, and finally came a new morning, full of hope. Xuan felt joy. It was just incredibly. She fell asleep, and woke up with a psychic. However, Grandfather Mu believed that this was not so important. The main thing is that the young lady is in order. Xuan also realized that he could now protect her brother, and asked if there was any news about him. The old man, lowering his head, admitted that he was very worried about him as soon as the girl returns to normal. They will go in search. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Yang Hu, who again appeared at the doorway. The guy asked how the young heroine feels, and said that he had important news. The girl replied that everything was fine. They just thought when it was better to go in search of her younger brother. Yang Hu noticed that this was excellent. The girl recovered in just a day. But he came to tell something important. This news puzzled Xuan. She looked at the hero in amazement. Grandfather Mu asked if the master did not tell her anything, but the girl did not understand what was being discussed. Jian Hu explained that, according to the information received, the followers of God began to act more actively. Therefore, Xuan should immediately go to the 7th city for the sake of its own safety. The girl did not understand how she could leave, because she does not even know where she was. First, you need to find him. The guy replied that for her life, it was necessary to fulfill this order. If Xuan gets out of control of the night patrol, she will become a serious threat to everyone. Xuan could not understand what he had in mind, and asked to explain. Everything happened unexpectedly. The girl took a step forward. Grandfather Mu was alert. The next moment, Xuan sneezed, and then an icy stream spun around her. Yang Hu reacted with lightning speed and destroyed the ice block with his fist. Shards of ice rained down on the floor. The heroes thoughtfully watched how they fall. Xuan scaredly asked what she had just done. It was too strange. Jian Hu admitted that he was sure that the girl completely took possession of the ability. However, it seems that this is so only in a stable state of her psyche. If this is repeated, the forces of Xuan can get out of control, and this will become a serious problem. Summing up, the guy said that this applies not only to her safety, but also to those around him, including her brother, she. Then he showed a photo of a young man. Xuan and Grandfather Mu unfortunately asked with excitement where he is now. Jian Hu replied that the last time he was seen leaving for the Forbidden Zone 77. Since then, his location is unknown. The girl asked in surprise if he really went there. The guy nodded and handed the sheet with the registration data of EX. Xuan wondered if his brother could leave the fog zone. It was amazing. It was impossible before. Meanwhile, Yang Hu said that the search has already begun, so do not worry. After short thoughts, Xuan agreed to go to the 7th city, but on 2 conditions. Firstly, if she can control her abilities, he wants to become part of the night patrol. Before voicing the second condition, the girl fell silent for several minutes. Then she asked to increase the number of people sent in search of EX and make sure of his safety. Meanwhile, 18 hours had already passed. He was happy to find that the doors finally succumbed and allowed him to go. However, it was not so safe inside. The guy wondered if it was worth going. Carefully looking inside, he He saw that there was nothing behind them. He used his superverse to understand what was hidden inside. The gates of the universe could create a spatial channel between different places. This channel could reach any point and called out at any time, because it was tied to the owner's soul. Based on this information, the guy decided that there was no danger here and decided to check, thinking where to go first of all. He did not notice how his hand reached for the entrance. Events developed with lightning speed. The young hero dragged on. Not having time to come to his senses, he was completely captured by energy and fell into the abyss. A few more moments passed, and the door slammed shut with a loud roar. The pets were surprised to observe how the gates disappeared very unexpectedly. He screamed, and his voice sprinkled throughout the stone forest. The guy in horror noticed that his clothes were beginning to evaporate. It was unimaginably. Suddenly, a strange object loomed ahead that attracted his attention. Unable to change the trajectory, it crashed into a soft surface with all its scope. The guy looked around before teleporting. He thought about something but suddenly froze. He drew attention to the noise behind the doors, which seemed strange to him. Now the young man had no doubt that he was in Red Romance, and thought about how this happened. Dudu, leaving the bath, was surprised to notice that the guy had finally returned. He looked at the girl in all eyes, unable to recover from shock. Meanwhile, the young lady admitted that she dreamed her last night, and she thought she would never see him again. The young man could not understand why he was in bed, and what to do now. It remained a mystery. Dudu, without restraining emotions, rushed to him, expressing an incredible joy. She said that she was very missing. She tried to pull away and explain how everything happened. However, the girl did not want to know the details. This is his house, and a friend can return when she wants. The guy was scared. Perhaps Dudu drank too much and therefore behaved strangely. However, she objected with a smile that everything was much more interesting than he expected. Without saying a word, the girl took out the handcuffs, leaving the young man in confusion. Then she admitted that she really drank a little, but not drunk, moreover. In her opinion, she was not sober either. Dudu said that she wanted to fasten him, and in the morning to check if it was a dream. The guy did not like the prospect of spending night in handcuffs. Without hesitation, he ordered the gates of the universe to open immediately. At that moment, when Dudu was already approaching the handcuffs, the gates opened. The next second, it disappeared with lightning speed, as if he had not been. The young lady looked disappointed and bewildered, because just a handsome man was in her hands. Looking around, the girl was finally convinced that he was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, the gates opened in another place, and with a roar, he fell to the ground. Taking a breath, he thought that teleportation, a useful thing, but her clothes could not stand it. Rising, the guy promised himself to find things resistant to such travels. At this time, the sound of a helicopter was heard over the city, which became louder. The aircraft swept smoothly, carefully examining the surroundings. Xuan, sitting inside, looked down in displeasure. Her thoughts were gloomy. She thoughtfully said that she was flying a helicopter for the first time, and this experience seemed strange to her. Yang Hu explained that at night you can move only like that, because many monsters hunt at this time. Besides, most cities cover the gate for the night. The walls are protected from dangers, and people can live calmly thanks to the night watch. The guy said that people like them are called guards. This is only one of the many posts. In addition to them, there are hunters for demons. They are sent to the forbidden zones to destroy the monsters, not allowing them to get out. He himself consists in such a team. Their main task is to significantly reduce the population of animals in order to protect the cities. There are also conductors. You can move not only through the air. Many people still have to ride the ground. The guides accompany caravans with supplies and guard them. In addition, there are researchers of forbidden zones. They are called Seekers of Truth. They study the rules and features of these places. Yang Hu added that it sounds simple, but in reality, it is extremely dangerous. Finally, there are psychics of mentors who teach newcomers at the academy. Xuan delightfully noted that there were so many things, but she most of all wanted to fight monsters as Commander Yang Hu. A little embarrassed, he said that there is no need to call him the commander. You can just Brother Hu. The young lady expressed a desire to learn more about demon hunters. Jian Hu admitted that he himself was not very aware, because he is the most inexperienced in his team. There are people are much more competent. The leader is blue, and the rest of the detachment